Happy to be with you here on another episode of Saints in the Parish podcast. So, one of the aspects of the Catholic Church is offering pilgrimages, and the pilgrimages go back well over 1,000 years, and they're all oriented toward people, journeying, a sacred journey, and that's what I would say a pilgrimage is. It's a sacred journey. So it's from here to there, and along the way we're praying and we're growing closer to God, and generally your goal is to end up in a sacred place, end up at St. Peter's or St. Paul's or St. Mary Major. I mean, in our life journey, let's just say our life pilgrimage, what is our goal? Where do we hope to end up after living this life as closely oriented to Christ as we possibly can? Where would we like to end up? Eternal life, in the presence of God in heaven. I mean, so this is kind of a mini pilgrimage, within the pilgrimage of life. And so about 40, a little more than 40 people from here, we traveled. And originally, we were going to just do Poland because we have a great devotion to St. John Paul II, obviously Pope for nearly 30 years of all of our lives, which is a significant part of all of our lives. We had a great devotion to St. Faustina because she not only did she institute the Divine Mercy, the image of Jesus and the Divine Mercy, but the Divine Mercy Chaplet, which so many people pray at the hour of mercy, 3:00, and you kind of just use your rosary beads. But so it's a beautiful prayer of Divine Mercy. And then Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe was a priest that was martyred in the concentration camp during World War II. Very holy priest. And so over the years, people have endured themselves to him. He fought admirably against the Nazis and against Germany. So with that in mind, we undertook that pilgrimage to really to learn more about them and to kind of complete the picture. Like I knew a lot about Pope John Paul II because he became Pope when I was in high school. He was shot when I was in high school, a senior. He's written countless works, and I always enjoyed reading all of his works. I mean, we had to read all of his encyclicals in the seminary, and most of them I thoroughly enjoyed. So I knew a lot about him from the time that he became Pope until the time he died. I didn't know so much about Karol Wojtyła. And I enjoyed learning more about, what he was like as a child. Went to the church of his baptism, went to the church that he went to church. He received First Communion, and just got to see his house that he grew up in. And so there's so much. Poland has such a deep, abiding love for him as one of their native sons, and it's very, very special. And the same with St. Faustina. I mean, she's greatly loved all over Poland and probably all over the world now. So got to do that, and we got to, we celebrated Mass at the monastery where St. Maximilian Kolbe was a Franciscan. A very beautiful, beautiful monastery, and the chapel was extremely simple, very austere. Not, like if you went in there and you say, compared to all the other beautiful churches we saw, it was like, this is nothing. This is like, well, that's the way he lived his life. And so there's a certain beauty in that. There's a certain beauty in that. So we were at the altar that he celebrated Mass there many, many times in his life. So that was special. And since we were in Poland, in Europe, we figured, hey, it's a Jubilee year and might as well go to Rome and, and go through the four holy doors. St. Peter, St. Paul's, St. John Lateran, and St. Mary Major. And we really enjoyed that too. It was special. And since we were in Rome and Assisi's only, an hour and a half away, when you want to go to see the shrine of the newly canonized first millennial Saint Carlos Acutis, and sure. So we went to Assisi. We ended our pilgrimage in Assisi. And I have to tell you that going to St. Carlo Acutis shrine was just very moving. Very, very moving. I'd kind of joke with everyone, tell everybody I cheated, because the line was so long. And this was a very grueling trip for me personally, physically, just a very grueling trip. And this was the end, and I didn't want to stand in line for an hour or 2 hours, whatever. So I went in the exit, and I sat down in the handicap section, which is right in front of his tomb, and just prayed there for a long while. I had lots of people to pray for there. Prayed for a lot of teenagers because, him being a teenager himself when he died and the way he lived his life. So I was able to pray for so many of our young people. He's a great inspiration. I think he will continue to be a great inspiration to many, many people. And the fact that he's in Assisi, right in this little town of Assisi, right in between St. Francis over there on the top of the hill and then St. Clair kind of down on the bottom. And he's right in the middle of a small little church called St. Mary Major.
I know you have talked a lot about this on other pilgrimages you've been on, but I'm sure you asked what was everybody's kind of favorite.
Okay, so I have to be honest with you and tell you that the opposite is true. I mean, I'm changing your question to what's the worst, what's the most depressed, okay, what's the saddest, and everyone on the pilgrimage would absolutely 100% agree with this. So we had to go to the Auschwitz concentration camp. 1.4 million people martyred there. It was so depressing knowing that you're walking on ground, going into barracks where 500 people were starved to death. Got to see the firing range where countless number of people were shot to death. Got to see the ovens where many people were incinerated. And as you can imagine, I'm sitting there the whole time thinking, I get one evil person, but like 500 more people had to contribute to that one evil person to make all this stuff happen. And there were a couple of, they did acknowledge a couple of soldiers that, said this isn't right. We're not doing this. And they lost their lives. They got shot too. So that's the way they took care of that. And they acknowledged that even there was one pretty high ranking, in the Nazi army that just said this isn't right. And as a matter of fact, the first 3,000 people that were martyred there, out of respect, they buried them in a grave, and then later, they were given an order, no, we don't want any trace that this is happening. What does that not sound evil? So dig them up and burn them, and that's why they built those big, large. They had 4 large furnaces and what they lied to the people, and they said, well, take off all your clothes because we got to go shower, and that's the shower, and it wasn't. It was obviously the furnace, and then they just were died right there, and then they were able to, just incinerate them and just, I'm not even, to be honest with you, I didn't even ask what they did with the remains. I guess I could have asked that question. I was just I too was kind of like, just sad and just real depressed. They shaved all their hair off and used their hair for pillows and for mattresses and things like that. I mean, it's just a real evil place. So I would say that would have been the low point of our trip, which really did help elevate us to some really high points. I think going to the church where St. Faustina was buried may have been the high point for many of our pilgrims. Right next to where she's buried is the white cassock, blood-soaked cassock that Pope John Paul was shot in, and it was that was kind of moving. And also they had in her where she is buried, they also had kind of a remembrance to John Paul II. The tomb that he was buried in when he was first buried in the crypt at St. Peter's was a very large tomb. It was probably about 15 feet long by 4 or 5 feet wide and solid marble. And I mean, I can't even imagine how heavy it is. Well, they shipped it over to Poland and they have it there and where St. Faustina is buried, and we were able to celebrate Mass right there in front of that. So that was kind of very interesting. So between St. Faustina, Maximilian Kolbe and St. John Paul II. I mean, Poland is just a blessed place. I mean, a very, 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 and they've kind of maintained that sense of spiritual life. Now, at a couple of places, there were some Polish teenagers standing in line. They were on a field trip, and so I just, picked up a conversation with them. They were happy because they like to speak English as much as they can, so they really enjoyed talking English. I was like, well, this is kind of Southern English. I was kind of kidding with them, and they didn't understand what I was saying, But it was interesting because they have no concept of the persecution that the Polish were under the Nazis, and they had no concept of what the oppression that the Polish were under communism, under fascism or socialism. No concept, because their grandparents are deceased and their parents were born after the fall of the wall in 1989. All their parents were. So that's why they were on these field trips studying the history, not from a religious standpoint, but from a historical standpoint. So I found that very interesting. And I mean, also, and I say this with total in prayerful concern, Poland has become a very capitalistic society, very successful now. I mean, I hate to say, guess why? Well, American investors in the 90s, and they took advantage of investing large sums into Poland. I mean, so everywhere you walk around, and particularly in Warsaw, is all American hotels, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, McDonald's, all American chain restaurants were all there. So I was like, we have to be careful. I know capitalism is good, and I think we have to accentuate the goodness part of it, but really be careful. And I think that's what Pope Francis kind of warned us of often. And we don't like to hear people criticize, us or our system. But there's an aspect of capitalism that can be very self-centered. And I do think we have to be very careful of that. And I think for the most part, many are. I would say certainly most of our parishioners are. Very generous, which tells you that they're using what God has given them to help other people. So I really, it'd be interesting to hear what all the pilgrims said was their favorite, because I just don't know that I could pick out a favorite, because it was so moving. All of it was so moving.
Mm-hmm. What would you say kind of to parishioners that didn't go on the pilgrimage? So kind of everybody listening that are, in the pews, how does y'all's pilgrimage affect them?
Great question, and so important. This is so important. And the image I like to use is, if, let's say, your family and you had, a wife, a brother, a sister, a child going on a retreat, and they really got a lot out of the retreat. So they come home. What does that bring to your family? It brings a certain holiness. Even if it's just a little step up, it helps. The conversation at the table now is going to be oriented toward, holiness, so it really does make a difference. So I like to think that the 40 people that went from our parish is like someone in your family, which is our family of faith here in our parish. I like to think that we had a great experience, grew closer to God, and we bring that back. And now I can only imagine that all of them are talking about the wonderful experiences that we had. Now, I was talking about the pilgrimage at all the masses this past weekend, and one of the masses I kind of got emotional. Now, if you know me, I'm not really very emotional. I'm not, but I was telling the story of, we had a little grandson of one of the people on the pilgrimage with us, and he brought a baseball to the papal audience. And I didn't want to tell him there's no chance the Pope ever signed him, but I knew in my heart there's no chance of the Pope stopping to sign a baseball. 125,000 people. He might stop. Francis used to stop and kiss a few babies. He didn't even stop to kiss babies. He stops and he just blesses the baby. You know what I mean? That's all. He doesn't even kiss the baby. So, I just thought the chances of that happening were pretty slim myself, and And it's one of those kind of things like, and I think you'll understand this, particularly in a couple of years. If someone does something nice for you, you're happy. But if someone does something nice for your child, you're even happier, innocent, and they go out of their way to be very kind to your child or your grandchild. And that's kind of the way I looked at it. I mean, this little boy, he's a baseball player, so he brought a baseball. He said, it'd be great if I get the, but the fact that he wanted the Pope to sign a baseball tells you something about the little boy. You know what I mean? So then the Pope did, and it wasn't easy for the Pope to stop because he's, his security guards make sure that he's, moving along because they got to get through the trip, in a half hour, 45 minutes, however long it is. But he did. He's like hitting the shoulder of the driver. Stop, stop, stop. When he saw the boy with the baseball. So he stops about 10, 15 feet away. And he said to the security guard, go get the ball from the little boy. And the security guard did, went and got the ball and signed it. And then he turned around and looked at the boy and he did thumbs up to the boy like that. Because the boy was so happy that he signed the baseball. And so I just thought that was just a special moment. I mean, okay, the Pope's another man, signed a baseball. He really did a good job signing Leo the 14th. It was a beautiful picture with the boy with the little ball. And, I just thought it was special. And that's a story that this little boy will be able to tell the rest of his life. Yeah. And here's the fisherman, in the footsteps of St. Peter. And I could see Peter doing that. Yeah. I could see Jesus doing that. So that was really, really special, So so I think that just the whole trip was very special. And, I'll encourage you, if you have the opportunity to go on a pilgrimage. I mean, you can go on a pilgrimage, in America. You can go on a pilgrimage, it doesn't have to be a long pilgrimage. But it's just an opportunity to kind of get away. It's kind of like a sacred journey. It's kind of like a retreat, but it's a moving retreat. So you can go on a retreat in a monastery and stay in one place, or you can kind of go on a retreat and kind of make it a moving retreat. Never so happy to be home, though. I will tell you, when it's kind of like when I got home, I feel like kissing the ground, just to thank God. I mean, because we are so blessed here. There's so much that we have that's a blessing, and I'm just a great reminder to use all the blessings that we've been given for good things.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I'd remind everybody to talk about, to ask questions about the retreat for people that went on it. If you're at a different parish, I know all parishes have people that have been on retreats, pilgrimages, because that's a very normal kind of, parishes normally try to facilitate every couple of years. If not, then, the diocese will do it. And, so ask questions about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Archbishop Ruvatussi, I'm just guessing, if he doesn't offer one next year in June for, to the culmination of him receiving the pallium. Yeah. Just thinking, I think Archbishop Rodi, I think he had one or two that he offered, and so it's real special.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always great to see the universal aspect of the church, see the church in other countries, obviously the church in Rome, for the mother church, and seeing the Pope, but to be reminded that the church is universal.
Yeah, the Holy Father gave a talk, and it really was a great talk, and it was short, but it was direct and to the point. It was very good. He did it in English, Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese. He didn't do German, and he didn't do any of the Eastern languages. They all had, if he doesn't do it, then he has one of the cardinals do it from those areas. So I think they did 14 languages. So that universality. And it's interesting because they already said all the groups are from the English speak, but he repeated that, which I thought was interesting, that he chose to welcome the English speaking. But there were English people from Japan. There were English speaking people from India. I mean, when he started listing all the places, all these English, they wasn't just obviously from America or United Kingdom. These English speaking groups were from all over the world too. So a lot of them speak English. So he's a wonderful man. Keep him in your prayers.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you haven't rated us on the podcast apps, do so. Give us 5-star, leave us a comment, and help us reach more people, and continue to pray for us. We will continue to pray for you, especially as we finally are leaving the summer, going into fall. And if you haven't heard, on November 1st, Leo announced that he will be creating John Henry Newman as Doctor of the Church on the Solemnity of All Saints. So we ask for John Henry Newman's intercession. And in the month of October, we have tons and tons and tons of big saints feast days. So keep an eye out on your calendar for that, and ask for all of their intercessions. And we will see you in the next episode.
God bless you.